And so today, Christmas season is behind us, and we have reached the milestone which we call Epiphany, always celebrated on January 6th. I frequently say that Epiphany is one of the most important yet least celebrated days on the Christian calendar. Why do I think that? Well, let's talk about it. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, January 6th, 2023. The celebration of the Epiphany is the celebration of the story of the Magi. You know, the wise men, or the three kings, a story told only in the Gospel according to Matthew and nowhere else. Which begs a question right away, doesn't it? If it is so important, why does only one Gospel writer even mention it? Not a bad question, but not as important as you might think. After all, the story of the birth of Jesus is recorded in only 2 of the 4 Gospels, and no one would say that diminishes the importance of that story. The story of the Magi covers half of the 2nd chapter of Matthew and contains a surprising amount of detail as well as wit. For our purposes, though, I only want to focus on the very beginning and the very end of the story, for those are the parts that are particularly important for us today. You know the story, or at least you know the basics. Wise men from the east come to pay homage to a newborn king of the Jews, bringing him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. In the middle of the story, you get the spectacle of a jealous king, Herod, plotting the destruction of the child, who he perceives as a threat to him and to his own power, as well as the power he will leave to his own children. That's the part of the story, though, that I will skip for today. Here's how the story begins and ends. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men, or magi, from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." And then we get this. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Okay, let's dispense with a couple of myths here. The first is that there were 3 wise men. Notice that nowhere, not once in this passage, do we learn how many there were, only that it was more than one, for the Greek term magi is plural. Western tradition holds that it was 3 magi, probably because of the number of gifts that are mentioned. But again, nowhere does it say that each of the magi brought only one gift. Interestingly enough, in the Eastern Church, the tradition is that there were 12 magi. But again, there is nothing in the biblical text to support that number either. Could have been 3, could have been 12, could have been almost any number. We just don't know. And so tradition fills in a biblical gap. The Western tradition even identifies the 3 magi by name: Balthasar, Melchior, and Gaspar, and even identifies them with different countries or regions. Balthasar with Arabia, Melchior with Persia, and Gaspar with India. A nice tradition, but once again, not supported by the biblical text itself. Could these things be true? Absolutely. But again, tradition is not the same as biblical text. Nevertheless, what the tradition points to is rather important. All we know is that they were from the east. East of what? And how far east? Again, we don't know. But what the tradition affirms is important. Not that there were 3 magi, or that their names were Balthasar, Melchior, and Gaspar, or that they were actually from Arabia, Persia, and India. Rather, the important thing is they were not Jews. They were outsiders, foreigners. In a word, Gentiles. Big deal, right? Well, it is a big deal, a huge big deal. For this represents the moment when the Gentiles began coming to worship the God of Israel. Think of that great text from Isaiah chapter 2 and from Micah. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Many peoples shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. Epiphany celebrates this great movement in the history of God's dealings with the world, already which Genesis foreshadowed, when membership in the household of God will no longer be a matter of birth into a particular people, but is open at last to all peoples and all nations. And that's a big, big deal. Why? Because God welcomes us. Tomorrow, saving the best for last. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.